back underway. Who are we waiting for here, Dave? Anyway, let's go to item, where are we, 9 on page 13. Mr Chairman, do you wish to
Yes, I do.
comment on that?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just go briefly through it. We had a report from Timata Park, and it was resolved that we'd retain their $500,000 despite they were very late in getting their strategic plan in place, and we gave them till 30th of June this year to do that. We also had a report on a Te Karamu, is it? Te Karamu? A Karamu enhancement strategy, and they're going to, we supported that, they're going to, for this financial year, but they're going to bring back a further report on that, on what they're doing, and regard that to us for the long-term development, long-term plan. We had a very good presentation from the people from the Gareth Morgan Trust on feral cat management. I thought they were very sensible and restrained, and everyone enjoyed that. We had a presentation from Sport Hawke's Bay on how to get people more active. Not sure what they actually wanted from us at the time, but I think it was our support. We had a report on the Otani wastewater resource consent, and as usual there was some vigorous conversation around that. We had a really excellent report on Lake Tutera. I thought it was the best dissertation we'd had on Lake Tutera, on the challenges there, that we're probably on a 50, 100 year turnaround, and the land use around the lake will have to be looked at over the next 100 years if we're ever going to get that lake right, which is our intention to do so. There were a couple of other reports. The Ebbets Stock Bank, we had a verbal report on that also. So, is there any questions? Otherwise,
You happy to move?
I'll move that.
Okay, there's no questions. Thank you. Councillor Graham's moved. Councillor Bevan seconded. Further discussion? He summed it up. I'll put that motion, and all those in favour please say aye.
Right.
Contrary, no. Carried. Councillor Dick has disappeared, but oh, here he is. So we're on to item 10 on page 15. Councillor Dick, the regional. Pardon me? I don't know if you had any. Have you had any comment there in regard to that paper? Any questions?
If anyone's wondering about who the Citizens Environmental Advocacy Centre is, that's Ken Crispin and some other people, largely Napier-based, who are concerned about the effect of heavy traffic on air pollution in the environment, air and noise pollution, and also the effect of rubber dust off tyres, and they were concerned about a lack of consultation by NZTA with a little justification, but not very much, to be honest. Anyway, they had their 10 or 15 minutes, and everyone went away reasonably happy, with a follow-up meeting to happen between them and NZTA. Other than that, it's straightforward stuff, apart from that variation to the plan, which gets some extra safety work going on State Highway 2 North.
Any questions? You happy to move, Councillor Dick, that
Yes.
that report be accepted? We have a seconder for that in the form of, thank you, Councillor Scott. Further discussion? Put that motion, and all those in favour please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. So we're going to leave the supporting accountability documents of item 11 until we get some confirmation back from the Audit Office. So let's now go then to the board composition of HBRIC. I'd like to invite Chairman Pearce and Director Robinson up to the front, please. And good morning and welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This, both Dr. Pearce and Mr. Robinson will be happy to answer questions, I believe, but I'll just outline first of all the paper. So this has been brought back to you because, as you'll be aware, the current policy means that the appointments to the board of Hawke's Bay Regional Investment Company will expire on or about the 30th of June this year. And so there's really a need now for Council to consider its the next steps in the appointment process of the board. Your current policy at the moment is not to have appointments of councillor directors, although the overall policy on the appointment and remuneration of directors does provide for that. But at the moment, your collective decision is not to have councillor directors, and so you need to actually give us some guidance today on whether or not that has changed, and if not, we will be able to move on to the next step of the process. So I've set out in the paper some guidance from the Office of the Auditor General, sorry, I beg your pardon, not Audit General, but Office of the Auditor General. And I'll particularly draw your attention there to paragraph 6.3, which says appointing elected members to CCO boards should be the exception. And they've set out a number of reasons why, and I've referenced the actual document in my paper so that you're able to refer to that and read it in full if you so wish. What I am recommending is that you retain your current policy of not appointing councillor directors to the board of HBRIC, but if necessary, you can revisit this policy following the October 2016 council elections. If a new incoming council wishes to reconsider that, there's no reason why that could not be done at that particular stage. So if you were to go with that particular recommendation, you still have the requirement to appoint a board that's effective from the 1st of July of this year. So the rest of the paper really sets out the process for that. Obviously there's also a public excluded paper which recommends some appointments, and that at this stage cannot be done in public but would be made public as soon as possible. But the point of this particular paper is to actually clarify the process that you want to follow. So so the recommendations have gone through, and I'm making an assumption first of all that you're going to support number 2, which is that there are no councillor director appointments to the board. Secondly, your policy around the appointment and remuneration of directors requires a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 7 directors to the board. I'm suggesting or recommending that you approve up to 5, and that could just give you a little bit of scope to determine exactly how many you wish to have at this particular point in time, bearing in mind that it's likely that a new council will want to revisit this. And then thirdly, should there be, following your consideration in public excluded, any vacancies for directors to a board, that you approve the establishment of an appointments committee to oversee the recommendations back to you on suitable candidates or suitable recommendations for appointment to the board. So that's really so this is very much a process paper, and discussion on who is of necessity, at least initially, to take place in public excluded. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Dick.
May or may not be relevant, but this notion of an appointments committee including a recently retired councillor sort of seems a bit odd. I mean, anyone who's retired would have retired 2.5 years ago.
Well, that's the current policy. That's how it's written.
And I can think of one, if not 2, who wouldn't even want to come in the door.
We wouldn't have them. Okay.
Well, I mean that's how the you're welcome at some point to revisit that policy on how directors are appointed, but at this stage, the policy that you adopted back in March 2014 sort of was quite reasonably prescriptive about the makeup of an appointments committee, and it included a recently retired councillor.
Recently retired or recently deceased? Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the notion of no councillor appointments in the meantime, and it's probably something that the council will need to come back and consider whether they actually want to even make an appointment sometime in the future. And I'm bearing in mind here the public excluded paper, which proposes appointments of some directors out to June 2019, which is almost the entire next 3-year period for this council once it's elected sometime later this year. And I'm not the least bit convinced that it's a good idea for us to make appointments for such a long length of time when it probably should be the incoming council that does that. So I want to, while our 2 directors are here, make an alternative proposal which I'd like to run past them for their consideration, which is, instead of doing what this paper proposes, that we actually confirm the appointment of 5 directors, but that we extend their current terms for a further 12-month period from the 1st of July, which would give sufficient time to get the RWSS work completed. It would give enough time for an incoming council. It would be seated around this table for about a 7 or 8 month period to consider the future for HBRIC, what HBRIC is going to be doing, who the appropriate director should be, and so forth. And it seems to me that's a more appropriate way to manage this than to try and sit around and appoint people for like 3-year periods, which really I think should be the domain of an incoming council, not this one. So I'm interested in the response of the current HBRIC directors to that suggestion.
Chairman, I think that's a matter that should be discussed in the public excluded.
The problem is that we have actually we can do it, because I'm looking at 3 here, and it's open there as to
So we can do it.
terms.
We can do
could
it.
that,
Yeah. So that is the appropriate place to do it.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you. Further questions? Do you wish to explore your recently retired further?
If you can find one that's prepared to serve, then fine. If you can't, you'll have to revisit the policy.
Okay. That's fine. You happy to move, Councillor Scott? Okay, seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Dick. Discussion. I'll put that motion, and all those in favour please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Okay, item 13, establishment of Ruataniwha Water Limited Partnership and its general partner. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I originally had intended to write items 13 and 14 together, but given that they both relate to the governance structure of the RWSS, but I actually thought, well, it's probably clearer, hopefully it's clearer to you if I separate them out, because we're actually looking for, in this case, of the Ruataniwha Water Limited Partner and RWM, which is his general partner, approval to establish those. The consultation was done in May 2014, and as compared to the paper on the additional council-controlled trading organisations, which we are asking you to go to consultation on that. So effectively, I've gone through in this particular paper what each of those entities, both Ruataniwha Water Limited Partnership and the Ruataniwha Water Management Limited, will do. You've had reasonably extensive advice in the past from the Board of HBRIC around how those will operate, and the fact that we have no choice but to establish RWM because it has to be a general partner. to manage the limited partnership on behalf of its partners. So this paper really just seeks your approval to formally establish those two entities at the date of financial close, and also, as with the previous paper, there will be recommendations to appoint directors to those entities or to RWM in any event in public excluded, and again that would be publicly released at suitable time as well. So I'm happy to take questions on that.
Councillor
RWM already, its establishment as CCO has already been consulted on.
That's right. As part of the when we did the statement of proposal for this back in May 2014.
Seems to be no questions. You happy to move? We have a seconder for that. Thank you. Councillor Barker, you wish to speak?
Mr Chairman, we have actually already consulted on this, and it is a requirement, and it's all set out very plainly there, so it's a case of, yes, this is what we need to do.
Thank you. Other speakers? Put the motion, then all those in favour please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. So let's go now to item 14.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. And before I speak to this, did councillors receive the email from Mrs Hooper around the slight correction to the recommendation, so that the correct title in number 2, recommendation 2, is council controlled trading organisation, not council law controlled, please? So if you could just please please note that first of all before I go into any discussion on this. So I've put in the diagram, which you've probably seen before on a whiteboard or a version similar to that, to try and, I think, as best as possible, pictorially represent the two entities, Holdco and ServiceCo, which have been called for want of better names at this stage, and where they fit into the governance structure around HBRIC. And I'd actually like Dr. Pearce and or Mr. Robinson to give us a greater explanation, really, or certainly you could explain better than I can, the actual role of those entities in the ongoing governance of this, please.
Thanks, Liz. So let's deal first with the subsidiary that's called Holdco. We've taken advice from independent advice from PwC here in Napier about the most appropriate way in which the investment might be held, considering that cash returns are both of an operating nature and a capital nature, will flow from the limited partnership to HBRIC and then back to council. Some of those as capital returns and some of those as operating returns. And the advice that we have at the present time is that this is most strongly facilitated by having this intermediate body, which we are currently calling Holdco, which ultimately holds the equity investment by HBRIC in the limited partnership and will hold the accompanying shares in RWM Limited. And that would be funded by debt from HBRIC with the results of the capital injection that the council makes into HBRIC. Our advice isn't completely finalised yet, but it's our view that it's important to start the process of consulting on this entity so that we have it available shortly after financial close. It's not absolutely essential that it's available at financial close, but we're trying to optimise the way in which we are able to make returns to council, and some of those returns to council I believe you will want to receive in your operating account and some in your capital account, and they are treated differently for taxation and a whole bunch of other reasons. So that's the rationale for Holdco. Maybe I should stop there and deal with questions about Holdco.
Councillor Dick.
So, Andy, effectively, Holdco becomes the subsidiary of HBRIC.
Yes.
For this purpose, rather than going straight into with a mix of people and entities in the limited partnership in RWM. So the alternative would be that HBRIC itself holds directly its equity in the limited partnership and is a limited partner. The holdco would be the limited partner, 100% owned by HBRIC. It would be one of the two limited partners in the limited partnership, and it would hold the equity investment in the limited partnership in exactly the same way that HBRIC would, but for complicated accounting reasons, it's more likely that this will help us flow cash back to you in the most helpful way to you. It's clearer.
So there are provisions in law which prevent us from setting up entities whose sole purpose is to avoid or reduce tax. Can you assure us that that's not the purpose of this construct?
Our legal advice is that this is an effective and efficient means of these arrangements, including its tax effectiveness, but that is not the sole purpose of making this arrangement.
So are you prepared in public excluded to give us a little bit more information about that? Because that really doesn't satisfy me.
Yes.
Further questions? Take us to the recommendations then. Oh, sorry.
Did you want to talk about service code?
Oh, service code, sorry,
Yeah.
excuse me. Jumps the gun.
So if I turn to service code, earlier when Trustpower was one of the investors, who would be an operating investor, if you like. It was a strategic part of their business. It was our view and theirs that the general partner of the subsidiary would do all of the activities of operating the limited partnership. So the limited partners themselves are prevented by law from taking an active part in the management of a limited partnership. That's why you have a general partner who does that. Both of the parties that we've been considering since late last year are financial investors, and they don't want to have an active role in the general partner. The general partner has to be there, but their view, which they have persuaded us about, is that they want an entity which is a subsidiary of ours to contract to the general partner to undertake all the activities that the general partner would otherwise be undertaking directly by itself. It's a purely contractual arrangement. Again, we've taken advice about, initially their view was we should do that as HBRIC, and our view has been, sorry, we can't do that as HBRIC because that would be getting remarkably close to the boundary of being a limited partner and undertaking the activities of the limited partnership. You might mount an argument that because we now have this holdco, we could avoid that trap because the limited partner would be the holdco. Our legal advice is that to keep ourselves as separate from all of this as we can and be completely straight and aligned with the requirements of the Limited Partnerships Act, that we form a separate subsidiary company which has a purely contractual arrangement with the general partner to do a number of the activities that the general partner would ordinarily undertake. There will be two other service contracts from the general partner to other parties, one to do technical and engineering activities, and a second to operate the electricity components of the system, so that the general partner will have three service contracts as it's configured now, one of those with Service Co, which is largely administrative activities, but also the compliance activities around the monitoring all of the things that are required to be monitored under the consents, all of the very large number of reports that have to be generated back to council, all of the approvals and so on for various things that have to be provided by council for the day-to-day operations of the general partner.
Questions? Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, a couple of questions, Andy. I take it that Service Co would be a fully owned subsidiary of HBRIC?
Yes, as the diagram shows, it's 100% owned, yes.
And would Service Co be effectively not-for-profit organisation? In other words, it will only charge what it costs to maintain their services?
We're in a complicated discussion with the other investment party. Our preferred position would be that it's completely not-for-profit, essentially so that it recovers 100% of its costs, but doesn't take any margin on those activities. The co-investor is of the view that they would prefer, in fact, a profit-making arrangement, if you like, so that there is a built-in margin into the contract, and we are still in the middle of negotiations about that point.
Sounds like the wrong way round.
It's a question of risk transfer. Their view is they would like to transfer a little bit of risk of cost overrun, obviously, and our response to that is, if you want to transfer that risk to us, there is a price. So our discussion is about the price.
Question of clarification. You said that Service Co is 100% owned by HBRIC. That's exactly right. You also then, in response to Peter Bevan, said our co-investor says this should take a profit. Now, I would have thought if you could only have a say in a company if you were a shareholder in it. So are they a co-investor in Service Co, or are you talking about them as a co-investor in the limited partnership? And
the latter. The latter.
Right, because it was just co-investor, 100% just didn't seem to be right to me.
Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, I'd welcome just a little more fleshing out, really, of what Service Co would do. I mean, you mentioned the administrative kinds of activities. So if there's so they're administering the FEMPs, for example, and so they'd have people on board capable of doing that. All the other reporting to HBRC, I guess that's what also is in mind, right? If there's a decision to be made about, do we focus our distribution build this direction versus that direction, or who's first in the pecking order there, so to speak, that's the entity that would make those kinds of decisions.
So it will have, in addition to the administrative and compliance and reporting activities that I talked about before, it will also undertake the sales activities for the build-out of the demand, and obviously it would have a role then in recommending, perhaps not deciding, that would probably be the general partner's decision, but recommending if choices have to be made about do we build out in this area versus that area to manage within the remaining amount of funds that there are for the second half of the distribution. It will certainly have a role in doing that, and it will have a role in billing and all of those kinds of administrative activities.
So in the fulfillment of those responsibilities, there's this dotted line that goes to RWM, and then there's the more direct accountability to HBRIC. At the end of the day, if people don't like how this company is doing its job, who do they go to? Do they go to HBRIC at the end of the day? What's the accountability, I guess, what's the chain of command from an accountability standpoint?
Well, it depends on, probably depends a bit on who you are.
But if you were a water user, then my view would be that your service agent, if you like, is Service Co, because that's the party that sends you the bills on behalf of the general partner. It's accountable to the general partner for all of those activities through its contractual arrangement with the general partner. So if a particular water user is unhappy with the service that they're getting from Service Co, they will have to speak to the general partner about that, because that's part of the contractual arrangements. The arrangement between HBRIC and the subsidiary is an ownership one.
I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not quite sure in that instance, the general partner being...
The general partner of the
Who
limited
is that?
partnership.
Who is that?
RWM Limited, as it says in the diagram here, and as it said in the previous paper.
So if there were a discontent with how the environmental compliance was playing out, in the first instance, somebody could go directly to Service Co. A local environmental group could go to Service Co and say, we don't think you're doing a good enough job on compliance. And if they weren't happy with the answer they got there, then what would their next step be?
Their next step would be to the general partner of the limited partnership, but I would imagine that long before that, they would have registered their concern with the council.
I'll be back to you. In regard, considering the decision here really is around public consultation, I just had a couple of questions on that, or one in particular. 11.2, all relevant information is provided for submitters to the Chief Executive here. So it'll be a more fulsome document than this one page, or was this it?
Yeah, no, it will be. Sorry, I hadn't got round to actually discussing that bit. I thought we were going to wait till finish questions on Service Co, so sorry. But essentially, a couple of things around the public consultation. First of all, we haven't determined, the ins and outs, the details of this yet, so I need to get that back to you. The essence was actually getting your approval to consult on it first before we went through that process. And the second part of it, second factor is it's not part of our annual plan, because it's not an amendment or a variation to that, so it will be undertaken separately. But bearing in mind that submitters will have an opportunity to be heard by council before they make their decision on it, so I think that's a key point. But we'll get back to you with information around what the consultation will look and feel like, but until we have your approval to go ahead and do that, we haven't done any work on it yet.
So that would be a discrete hearing, as it were?
Well, yeah, it'll be separate to your hearing of submissions on the annual plan. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Barker had I suspect a question back to where we were just before. But
No, I've got a slightly different one. I'm following up on Councillor Bevan's question about being non-profitable or zero profit or having a profit. And Dr. Pearce said that there was a discussion going on about the Service Co running a profit for the purposes of sharing risk. Now, I understand the relationship between profit and risk, and that this was being driven by the other investor. And I'm just trying to get the logic of how it's beneficial to the other investor to have Service Co put an additional charge on its activity so it generates a profit, and how in having Service Co which generates a profit, which presumably, because of the 100% shareholding of HBRIC, goes back to HBRIC, how this is in some way mitigating against the risk for the investor. Am I missing a link in the chain here? And if so, could you just describe it for me, because it wasn't quite clear in the way you described it. Thank you.
So we're in the middle of these discussions. I don't understand their position either.
Oh.
If I were they, I would be saying, we're asking you to do a task that we would ordinarily have to do ourselves.
Yep.
Why would we want you to take a margin on this, right? Doesn't seem to make a great deal of sense to me. The position that's been put back to us is they see some riskiness about this, about cost overruns and other things, that HBRIC and a subsidiary of HBRIC is more knowledgeable and better positioned to understand and manage those risks than they would be as a purely financial investor. And they would be willing to pay a margin to transfer that risk.
A margin, but a fixed price.
So in other words, they want a fixed price.
Yeah.
Yep, they want a fixed price, including a margin. And so it all comes down to, well, what are you willing to pay us to take on, over and above the costs of doing this, what are you willing to pay us in order to take on this risk about cost overruns or variations? It's pretty straightforward. And, we're not there yet. We could land in either position.
Okay.
I get that, thank you, that's clearer.
Councillor Pipe and then Councillor Belford.
Yeah, just to get some clarity in my mind anyway, I understand the reasons for setting this up, the accounting reasons and the taxation advantages that you've talked about, and the setting up of holdco and service co. But you mentioned earlier on that there would be another couple of service agreements. There'd be one for technical engineering, and there'd be another one for the electricity components. So those two service agreements, you've got a service agreement there on that dotted line in the singular. So where do those two service agreements come in? Who do they report to? Those other ones.
So they're between RWM Limited, excuse me, and other third parties. So it's not relevant to council or council's consultation process as to, you don't need to consult about them. That's a matter for RWM to deal with.
So those two service agreements report then to RWM?
To RWM.
Not to the service code?
Not to the service code.
So it's clear we're legally required to consult on this, but I guess my question is, when and why now? I mean, this seems to be, to me, a bit of cart before the horse. This is presuming that project's going forward. Why would we go to the trouble of consulting on this until we're sure of that? Is the establishment of this a condition of the investor?
So there are many things that need to be done in order to have this, all the pieces in place. I would not want to be in a position in a month's time or in 6 weeks' time, or whenever, when we do get to financial close, to then, to then have to commence a consultation process, or go through this process to even commence a consultation process. We could be regarded as being premature here. On the other hand, if we waited for a while, I'm sure at least one person in this room would regard us as having been dilatory in not having taken this beforehand. There's no fantastically right answer here. We think it's prudent to do it now. We've asked council to do it now, so that if necessary, the pieces will be in place.
Happy to move? Do I hear that? Happy to second? Yeah, thank you. Further discussion? You wish to speak?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your report on this. We have heard from our directors today that the professional advice from them is that this needs to be set up. At first glance, it did look very complicated, but they have given us very clear reasons as to why it should be there. And I do note that they have referred to the legal and the tax advice that they have had, and that is something that we have to accept. It's not for us to decide the vehicle. What the question for us is, what is best for Hawke's Bay Regional Council, and through that, what is best for the ratepayer, and that has to be on optimising the return to us of this investment. So I'm pleased to support this motion.
Now is your time. So no one else has got a hand up, Councillor Barker. So your reservation has been parked. Other speakers? I'll put the motion then. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Thank you. Now, while we're on a roll, HBRIC Limited